Hey, what's up everybody? Chris here, and today I'm bringing you my review of John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum, and I'll start by saying that I think that title is way too long and ridiculous, and not everybody's going to see that and understand what Parabellum means. You know, if you look it up, you might see a couple of different definitions for that, but I really think they should have just called it John Wick Chapter 3, because the first one's John Wick, the second one's John Wick Chapter 2, and just continuing with that would have made a lot more sense to me. That's going to send me off on a whole rant about titles, such as the most recent Halloween movie being called Halloween, when it should have been called something like Michael Myers or The Shape, or just something to distinguish it from the original movie. But all that to say, let's jump into talking about this movie. So at a later point in the video, after just a couple of minutes here, I will get into some spoiler material. So I'll put a notice right above my head here, right above my hand, to indicate that spoilers are taking place. So the first few minutes are going to be spoiler free. And just to give you sort of my general impressions of the movie. So going into it, I love the first John Wick. I think it's a great movie. I thought at the time it was really surprising to see Keanu Reeves in a really bona fide, hardcore action movie that had an unexpected plot, really good character development, and some world building that went above and beyond, I think, what a lot of people expected for that type of movie. John Wick Chapter 2 continued with that, and in a lot of ways, I would say is as good as the first one, though it doesn't have that maybe lightning in a bottle effect that the first one had. It's able to do a lot of the same types of things, and I think that with the second one, they really took the fight choreography up to another level and just had some really cool extended scenes, especially in the subway where Wick is battling the guy who was the protector of the person from the high table in that movie that he was sent to assassinate because of him getting back into this world of assassins. But all that to say, how does John Wick Chapter 3 stack up to the first two movies? I would say that in terms of fight choreography, it's the best of all three of the movies. I think that it built upon what happened in the first one and Chapter 2 and just takes it up to another level. It's one of the best action movies that I've ever seen. Some people might hear that and think, oh, that's recency bias. You're just leaving the theater. It just stands out in your mind. You might, remember other movies, or if you take the time to remember other movies like The Matrix or that sort of thing, another Keanu Reeves movie, funnily enough. But I can say with confidence that, even though I've never seen every movie ever made, who has, I think that this is one of the best action movies that I've ever seen from a fight choreography perspective, and just from using what I would say is minimal CGI to make that happen. Clearly, a lot of hard work, time, and effort was put into this movie from that perspective. Story-wise, I think it's the weakest of the three, just to be perfectly blunt. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the spoiler section, but it just, to me, kind of goes into territory that doesn't quite cause it to jump the shark altogether, but this was the first time in watching a John Wick movie that I found myself rolling my eyes a little bit at the story. It serves to get Wick from point A to point B to point C and to keep the fight choreography moving along, and that's really all it needs to do. And in some ways, it does give us a little more background about who he is as a person, where he's coming from, how he got into this world in the first place. But there are some components of that I just didn't really love all that much. So overall, before I get into spoilers, should you see the movie? If you like the first two movies, absolutely go see it. I think you'll have a great time. I would say that, if for some reason you saw the first two and were a little bit squeamish, in reaction to it because of the level of violence that's included and that sort of thing, this is that times 10 maybe, taking it up even another notch in that regard. But yeah, if you like action movies, if you like the first two movies, you'll probably like this one. But I would say don't expect miracles in terms of the story. I think this is definitely the weakest of the three in terms of the story. So now we're getting into spoiler territory. So spoilers, here they come. So what is it about the movie that I didn't like as much? So I mentioned earlier, I think the fight choreography is great. I think it, whoever was in charge of that, and I'll look it up here in just a little bit, but whoever was in charge of that component of the movie did a great job, and Keanu Reeves did an awesome job, as he has done with the first two movies, and in really most action movies that he's in as well. When I mentioned that the story seemed a little more absurd even than the first two movies, and when you see these movies, it does require, of course, a suspension of disbelief. I think going into the second movie, they did a good job of kind of immersing an audience, or the audience, into this world of assassins. and the fact that it kind of permeates everything around us without the everyday person knowing about it. With this movie, they take that up a little bit more, and I think the thing that I didn't like quite as much is that it seemed like, especially early on in the movie, literally everybody that John Wick ran into knew about the Assassin's Guild, even getting to a random cab. Clearly somebody knows about it as soon as he shows one of those golden coins that represents his, involvement in that League of Assassins. So I thought, from sort of an outsider's point of view, it just seemed like there weren't quite as many people who weren't in the know about it. And so, I guess that's the world they live in. That's the universe that this franchise is building. But it just seemed weird that literally almost everybody seemed to be involved with it, and somehow just people walking down the street, everybody, right? You see that a little bit in chapter 2, especially toward the end where people are all out to get Wick. But here that happens again, and even more so, I would say, maybe to another level. There's also a component of this movie where Wick, tries to go to the high table to make amends for what he did in assassinating someone on the grounds of the Continental, which was consecrated ground in the second movie and the first movie. And at one point that involves him, traveling abroad. And before I get to that, I will say they give you some information about who he is and where he comes from. And you learn that he was part of this Belarus League of Assassins. And you see at one point he goes to this kind of opera house, ballet house in New York where everyone has the same tattoo that he has on his back. And you start to make some connections. And you even see that his name isn't actually John Wick. It's a European name that I can't remember off the top of my head, but you see that he's got, obviously a deep and long-seated involvement in this, and you even get kind of some brief glimpses into how he was trained, where you see him walking through that setting. But he cashes in his ticket, or this ticket that he's been holding on to all of his life, apparently, to be granted passage to somewhere else for the sake of safety. And so he does that. He goes abroad and he teams up with Halle Berry's character, who is someone that he apparently had some involvement with in the past. And she is, I would say, as skilled of an assassin as him, or at least very close to that same level of skill. And that is definitely one of the highlights of the movie, that whole scene and sequence with her character being involved. In fact, one of the things about the movie that I think would have made it a little bit better in the final act, the final third, is if Halle Berry were in it more and were a little more involved. She has a good role in this movie, and she does a great job with it. I don't know that I've seen Halle Berry in a movie in a long time, but here she really handles it well and does a good job with it. But there's a scene where they have to go to some of the more higher up officials of the Assassin's Higher Table Guild, and she has these 2 German shepherds that are trained at her beck and call. And there's this extended fight sequence where she's able to sort of sick them on people, and just the way that they choreograph that and the way the camera tracks throughout that is amazing. Again, some of the best action sequences I've ever seen. So that's definitely a highlight of the movie. And again, the cinematics of it in general are beautiful. If you think about the lighting in something like John Wick 2, you get duplication of that here in a lot of different sequences, and so they do a good job from that perspective as well. But, once they get past that point, John has to go and find the person who is in charge of everything with the Assassin's Guild. And it requires him sort of cryptically wandering out into the desert, following a star in the sky and hoping that someone finds him. It just seemed a little bit weird and a little bit odd and just a little bit forced to me, the way that played out. There are some twists and turns that come after that, where he agrees to assassinate Winston, who's in charge of the Continental in New York, in order to be, have his excommunicado status revoked and to gain entry back into the Assassin's Guild. It was a little too twisty-turny for me in the whole desert sequence, and that whole idea of the people who run this whole thing just living out in the middle of the nowhere in the desert and kind of at arm's length running. It just seemed a little bit odd. But I guess if you can buy into the rest of the world, why not buy into that, right? But anyway, for me, it was just a little bit, weird. And it's really the only point in any of the John Wick movies where I've rolled my eyes a little bit. So to me, that stood out as being not quite the most well-written component of the movie. When it gets into the final sequence, though, and there is a sort of mini war, a skirmish that unfolds in the Continental, I thought that they handled that again great. The movie gets back to what it does really well, which is to say the action sequences and the fighting and the gunplay. So again, in that regard, it tends to succeed. But of course, as you get toward the end of the movie, it ends with kind of a non-ending. I was sort of hoping there might be a little bit of finality to this, given that it was the third movie. I was thinking maybe this would be a trilogy and they would end it, but of course, if these movies are making a lot of money, they're going to keep it going for as long as they can. So it doesn't really have an ending. It has an ending to this story in a certain sense, but it kind of ends like the second one ends, where you can see that John Wick is now going to team up with Lawrence Fishburne's character. And, you know, if you think about the way the second one ended, it was like, yeah, now it's war. Everybody's after John Wick. Now it's sort of the reverse. John Wick is after everybody, and yeah, it's war again. So, you know, I'm glad that they're going to make another one. I appreciate these movies mainly for the choreography. I did appreciate the story in the first two. The third one falters a little bit, I think, and I'm hoping the fourth one will sort of bring it back to what it used to be. Another issue I have with the ending of this is that John Wick falls off of a building, hits a couple of fire escapes on the way down, and is somehow still alive, right? I mean, you know, I guess, again, if he's going to survive all of these gunfights because of his bulletproof, you know, blazer and suit and all of that, then fine, but it just stretches the believability maybe a little too far at points. And so, you know, hopefully when they get to the fourth movie, they can rectify that. So to summarize, the good, again, great action scenes, great gunplay, great choreography. Halle Berry's character and her two canine accomplices that help take out the enemies of Wick are some of the best parts of this. And again, I think, you know, Reeves and Halle Berry overall do the best job they can do with this. The bad, again, the story I think falters a little bit. It's a little bit too outlandish, even more so than what you would get in the other movies. And I think it stretches believability just a little too much at certain points. So I'm going to do something different with this review, which is assign it a score, and something that I want to do with future reviews is the same sort of thing. So if 0 is a movie that's totally unwatchable and 10 is a masterpiece, I'm giving this a 7, basically because it's one of the best action movies I've ever seen. The choreography is great with it. If you are going to see this movie and check it out, let me know what you think about it. If you like the movie, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you like the content, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching. And again, in the comments, let me know what you think about this movie and the other entries in the series. Thanks for watching.